Hey, what is going on? It is Thursday, February 10th, 2022. This week seems to be flying by, but it is actually slow for reasons that are related to my job. I am uh, stuck on something at work, and it's just been a long time that I've been stuck on it, and I'm actually truly not interested in what I'm doing right now. And, sometimes at work, when you're working, I realize that there's times when you're really just not interested in something, and it could be a long period of several weeks possibly. And that's what the situation is now, and I'm thinking nothing more than uh, figuring out how I can kind of extricate myself from the current situation. Anyway, so, but talking about the brain and talking about the anatomy, and especially as it's concerned with human life extension and possibly cognition and soul transference. I don't know. It relaxes me. This all relaxes me and makes me ready for the day because this feels linked to my greater purpose. Anyway, I should have been a doctor. I would have made more money. Anyway, so today we're going to be talking more about the frontal lobe. I spent a lot of time on the basal ganglia. I didn't actually upload the video I had from yesterday where I talked about the primary motor cortex more, where I talked about a few other things, the thalamus, etc. So today I'm going to be talking about something called the frontal eye area, and that's outside of the region of the premotor area and the primary motor area. So the premotor and primary motor area have quite a bit. I mean, there's volumes and volumes worth more books that are written regarding these two particular regions of the brain, these two gyri. But either way, I'm just trying to do an overview now because I think that's the right way to go. The frontal eye area, frontal eye field, and that's only a little bit of what I'm going to talk about, but the frontal eye field is a part of the brain that's responsible for what's known as saccadic eye movement, or saccades. I think that's how you pronounce it. So basically what the frontal eye field does, it communicates or it receives input from your occipital lobe, which is something I haven't touched on yet, and your occipital lobe is back here. The occipital lobe sends data to this frontal eye field, which then connects by a somewhat complicated series of connections to your eyes. And so your frontal eye fields are not responsible for vision, so to speak, in terms of like obtaining and processing that data. I'm a little hesitant because there is processing going on in the frontal eye fields, but essentially the frontal eye fields, they do a lot of things, but they're responsible for your quick, rapid movement of your eyes. So if you've ever seen a person like look around real quickly, or like browse an area for something quick, like let's say you lost your keys and you're looking for your keys in a pile of things, your brain is going to focus on your keys as the object of your pursuit, and your eye movement due to stimulus of your frontal eye fields will be more jerky, and because you don't need to process all the visual information around you when you're looking for your keys, right? You need to kind of narrow that information down quickly. The same goes for when you're driving, right? You see a lot of things when you're driving, but the thing you need to focus on are in front of you on the road, and you have to look for dangers on the side of you, right, as you're going down the road, and there may be other drivers not driving defensively. So, and you also need to look for signs to direct you where you need to go. One could actually say maybe your frontal cortex is not trained if you're used to looking at GPS and no longer used to looking at signs. So your frontal eye fields will no longer saccadically efficiently move to signs that you need. Well, maybe it may move to signs, but you won't process as effectively the meaning of those signs, especially if they're more complex and directional in nature. Something like stop or go, as your eyes dart to them, will be effectively giving you information back. But yeah, there's lots of things that, the frontal eye fields contain shortcuts for your eyes to move. So the thing is, so the connections in the frontal eye fields look kind of like this. There's a lot of complex nerve terminology, complex partially because the names are long. For example, there are these nerves. So basically, your frontal eye fields. These are your eyes. These are your frontal eye fields, and through this crisscross series of nerves connecting from your upper motor neurons to your eye muscles, right? You have this whole. You have these chain of nerve nuclei acting, right? There's synapsing neurons here, which then cause your eyes to receive a signal to do something specific, right? So, for example, this one is called premedial pons reticular formation, right? The left premedial pons reticular formation, and then there's the right premedial pons reticular formation, and the intermediate ones are also differentiating between. The reason for all of these is a whole different subject on its own, but just to understand that this connection, the electrical stimulation will cause eye movement back and forth here of your pupils in a direction of a particular stimulus. And depending on how you're studying this, if there's a lesion on your frontal eye fields, right, in someone's brain in that area, then you won't see the movement normally responding to stimulus. You'll see drifting of your eyes, and you'll see perhaps movement opposed to the natural stimulus, like away from a stimulus. So that's actually, thinking about that's kind of sad, right? Because you want to think about consciousness, and you want to think about a person's ability to control their faculties, but there are damages to the brain can prevent control of those faculties from manifesting, and something simple as these saccades can be caused to be interrupted, which will appear as a lack of consciousness. So that's why one of the things that struck me is that one of the videos I was watching to study this stuff talked about the brain's entirety being involved in consciousness. And yeah, I mean, so it may not just be one part, but then there's awareness and consciousness, so we'll get to that. The other thing I want to talk about, so that's just a little bit on the frontal eye fields. If you want a more complex diagram, there's a lot to go into here, and at some point I plan on breaking down this diagram. This is the most important, probably systems level diagram of the frontal eye fields, because it involves everything from the prefrontal cortex to the thalamus to the basal ganglia to the cerebellum to the saccade generators to everything in between, including the visual cortex, right? So, and the parietal and temporal cortex. So this kind of involves the entire brain map of the function of the frontal eye fields. So, next thing I want to talk about quickly is Broadman areas. So the brain is divided into areas of functionality based on tissue structure. And this was done in the early 20th century by a physician named Corbinius Broadman, who died in 1918. And he actually took parts of the brain, he stained them, and he looked at the different stains, and I guess with the microscopes of the day, he was able to determine different structures of the brains, of the pieces of the brain, in terms of what type of neurons are present, how the neurons are organized, etc. And he used these regions of homogeneous organization and divided from other regions of a different type of homogeneous organization, and he cut them down and put them into about 52 separate, what he called Broadman areas. So I guess this was done through visual inspection of several brains. I'll have to look into how he divided them, but the key thing is in medical school, people normally talk about the gyri and the sulci as the anatomical indicators of a particular piece of the brain, right? And then they talk about the function of those sulci and gyri as like the prefrontal cortex, the primary motor cortex, the sensory, secondary motor area, etc., the frontal eye fields, right? But those also have a Broadman area associated with them, which is really interesting from an anatomical perspective because the structuring of the group of neurons that comprise a certain Broadman area. For example, the primary motor cortex is Broadman area 4, the frontal eye fields is Broadman area 8, the somatosensory cortex, primary somatosensory cortex is Broadman area 1, 2, and 3, and Broadman area 6 is the premotor area and the secondary motor area. And these all have different, like, I mean, it's kind of depicted here, but then some have like pyramidal neurons, some have layers of other types of neurons that are stacked on top of each other, and other spacing of neurons. So yes, you could go really in depth in a particular Broadman area, and these are still used in brain differentiation in medical school, and I guess also to indicate the location of brain regions. But I don't know if it's as much as the more complex medical area, like Broca's area or Wernicke's area, or primary motor cortex instead of Broadman area 4. So that's a quick diversion into the cytotectonic map of the brain, Broadman cytotectonic map, and the cytotectonic map. Again, cytotectonic means like the geographic organization of the cells. Cyto meaning cells, of the nerve cells, and there's different maps depending on what surface of the brain you're looking at, whether you're looking at the lateral surface or the medial surface, or like, I guess like because the medial surface is essentially a sagittal view of the brain. So yeah, that's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. There's a lot to get into, and we'll get into more later on. See you.